I'll stop being a
Hey,
baby.
everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We got another fantastic show for you planned out today. As you can see, I have a sling on. I had some injuries at jiu-jitsu yesterday, but while I'm whining, as Sean likes to say, you should be liking the channel, hitting the subscribe button, doing the notification stuff. That way you get your email every day we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, the topic today is going to be our circle of trust, which I'm looking forward to talking about this because we've kind of touched on it on a few different occasions on like, the you are an amalgamation of the closest five people that you know and all that good stuff, but we're going to dive into it a little bit more in depth. But before we do that, Eric, you're a new face. Thanks for coming on.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Like, can you give me like a 30, 45-second rundown, who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff, and then we'll dive into the convo.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, I live all over the world a lot of the times. From New York originally. I was a former professional fighter, and then I coached MMA fighters for quite some time, and I moved into coaching leadership and mindset through emotional intelligence is what I currently do now for executives and for some everyday guys as well.
Outstanding. Awesome. Well, we are excited to talk to you. This is going to be a good one. Now, and Tanya, I mean, if you don't know Tanya yet, if you follow the collective, you should know who Tanya is. But Tanya, why don't you give us it's been a while, so give us a little rundown.
Uh, well, for me, I'm, I guess, a graphic artist, a visual artist, photographer, designer, illustrator, now podcaster, and uh, have the fortune of knowing Chance and Sean.
Outstanding. Misfortune, fortune. I like that. I think I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that more often. All right, so let's get into our circle of trust. Unless, Sean, you feeling left out, do you want to add a little blurb?
Hi, I'm Sean.
There
Sean
you
loves
go.
talking about himself. If there's
He
anything Sean
certainly
loves,
does.
it's talking about himself.
Okay, so I wanted to get into Circle of Trust. I'll talk about it a little bit. Sean, you put out a really good post earlier today
Thanks.
about the Circle of Trust. Do you want to give us a little rundown on what you put in that post?
Well, I think anyone can go over there and read the details on it, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd prefer people to go and read it themselves and get their own interpretation of it. But of overarching level or a high order sort of level on trust, I think it really comes down to consistency, predictability, reliability. These kind of words where we all understand what trust is, but I think that trust nowadays is casually tossed around or too casually tossed around as a word that is well understood. I think trust is being watered down to some degree where it isn't all about consistency or constant reliability. It is kind of almost infrequent or sporadic efforts nowadays can kind of be understood as trustworthy to some degree. But I don't feel that way. That's why I threw up, I guess, that photo from back in 1989, where I was in a six-way smoke jump with the Skyhawks. It's literally a circle. In order to get in that circle, you have to demonstrate your proficiency, your reliability, your consistency. Once you're connected in the circle, everyone's looking everyone in the eye in that photo. You're all facing inwards, observing the men around you, and you're considering whether they are reliable in the moment, whether they are predictably operating based on the expectations of the standard operating procedures in that moment. And so looking someone in the eye with expectations and knowing that they're going to deliver based on that trustworthiness in the moment, that's a really powerful, a really binding moment amongst men or women or small groups. And that's kind of what we're trying to do over here to some degree, is create a consistent, reliable conversation that people can have certain expectations of, and trust when they come over here and listen to it that they're gonna leave better for it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I'm very happy to be within other people's circle of trust. It's pretty awesome. Eric, what do you think of when I'm talking about the circle of trust? What's your thoughts?
So I've been spending quite a bit of time with just the idea of trust in general, and I think there's, I don't know, for me when I look at it, like contextually, there's different types of trust, right? So we're talking about like an inner circle. These would be people that I know to be willing to go, I don't know, step into danger of some sorts, and not necessarily like physical danger, but can this person go with me to places that perhaps are emotionally dangerous or emotionally vulnerable? Like it's, for me, trust is about the depth in which I believe that this person can go, but also the understanding that they're human and fallible. So there's got to be some wiggle room in there. I don't think trust is like it's not the expectation that you won't let me down, but it's it's the understanding of how far I think that you can go with me. I think is how I look at it.
Interesting. Tanya, what are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts on trust are, excuse me, they're a work in progress, because for me, trust was something that didn't make sense to me as a child. Eric and I both top score on the adverse childhood experiences scale. So trust is something that I am now starting to finally be able to calibrate, to be able to discern. And Eric actually just said something really interesting about how it is something that it's a way you gauge how far you'll go with me. Previously, I had a very childlike idea of trust, where I trust you implicitly with everything, or absolutely terrified, or absolutely keep you out of my circle. And now for me, it is as Sean has described to me once before, it's a series of circles that get closer and closer, or progressively further and further from me, depending on which direction you're going. And I'll give you a small, I wouldn't say a task, but a small piece of trust, and be like, let's see how you handle this. And then once you've demonstrated you can yield that with care and respect, then you get closer and closer. So I would say that is more or less my work in progress sketch of what trust is.
I think that this panel will be an interesting dive into what trust is. I think this is going to be great. Sean, you have any additional points?
I do. As a follow-on, I would like to say that as Tanya and Eric were discussing, I think what we're talking about is granularity of trust, or depth of trust, or level of trust, or some sort of scale of trust, because what I'm hearing is maybe I'll trust this person 80%, or I'll trust this person 90%, or I'll trust this person to go to the ends of the earth for me, or I'll just trust this person to go across the parking lot for me. So these are granularities, or sliding scales, we'll call it, and it takes nuance to understand what that means to you and what it means for the other person. And how do you develop nuance? It's time. As I'd stated in my post this morning, trust is developed through a consistent and reliable production of whatever the expectation is. But that isn't done over a period of half a day. I ain't going to trust someone with my life if I've only known them for half a day, unless it's freaking mandatory. I've got no other option. Who I am going to trust with my life is someone that I've known for a boatload of years and is a reliable producer of positive outcomes. That's what trust is to me. And so that circle of trust came about after several years of being in the game, understanding the game, knowing who's who in the zoo, and then earning my way into that circle, and then every single day earning my seat within that circle. So to get into the circle of trust, it takes time, consistent, predictable, reliable effort with reliable outcomes, the expectations of the group for you to step into it. Once you've demonstrated that you can consistently produce for that circle of trust, once you're in it, that's just phase one. Phase two is earning it every day, and then consistently displaying that you are the kind of person that belongs in that trustful environment. And over time, perhaps you'll become someone who is not a gatekeeper, but someone who can then begin to understand who else can come into the group or who doesn't belong in the group. And I'm talking about I'm talking about very small teams, very small units, very small groups of trustful individuals that are expected to perform at a high level. I'm thinking of Eric in the sense of BJJ. If you put a whole bunch of BJJ black belts together on the mat and they don't know each other, they're going to roll like black belts for sure. They're going to do their black belt thing. They're going to do all the BJJ stuff. But if you put those same black belts onto the mat and now they've known each other for years, it's a different vibe. It's a different role. It's a different thing. And so if I know Eric for half a day and we roll, of course he's going to smash me. But if I've known Eric for a decade and we roll, of course he's going to smash me. But at least I understand the nuance of the moment. I understand the granularity of what's going on. And that, to me, is what a circle of trust is. You can't step into a circle and then be instantly pronounced now trustworthy or trustful, or you're the epitome of trust. You've got to step in as phase one, and then that's the day that you begin earning the trust. They'll let you in trusting you, but then once you're in, you've got to demonstrate that trust on the daily.
Yeah, there's so many different pathways we could go down that one. Eric, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think so I grew up in an environment that was not worth trusting, right? And there's really nothing trustworthy about anybody that was around me, in charge of me, etc. So one of the things that did lead me to is to learn how to develop skills to trust myself. And it kind of, as I became an adult and moved into adult years, it did lead into like an over dependence upon trusting myself and not letting people in. So there were definitely some walls up. And I was at a training once, an emotional intelligence training once, and I was listening to the trainer talk, and he said this, and it kind of shook me a little bit. He said, in his belief, people with trust issues, what they really don't trust themselves. And I was like, man, that makes a lot of sense. And the more I trust myself, the less I really worry, or even the idea of trust with others is actually a conversation with me. Like I'm actually pretty trusting with a lot of things. I'll put a lot of my personal information out on the internet. I'll share a lot of very personal stories because I trust myself. I trust that I'll be able to handle whatever reactions come my way. And so to the level that I trust myself, oftentimes is to the level that I trust. Period. I believe, and and there's some different contexts. So I've been when I was a nightclub bouncer, I was in in New York, life or death situations, and I would trust those guys in those situations. Now, would I trust those guys with some heavy emotional topics? Like maybe not. And it's not about trusting them. It's like, would I find value in going to them with those topics is probably more appropriate. It's not that I wouldn't trust them or I'd be afraid that my trust would be let down. It's that I don't know that the value would be there for me. So I think that it's oftentimes a topic of utility more than trust for me personally in most things.
Interesting. Tanya, you got any thoughts?
I was thinking actually to how Eric and I met because I dabble in some MMA photography, and I wandered down to Alliance MMA in San Diego. And being a photographer, especially MMA training, involves a lot of trust because I'm documenting what happens in training. And photos may not tell the whole story, but boy, people will create opinions very, very quickly from a single frame. And he was lovely. They were all very lovely. They trusted me to an extent. They're just like, I told them exactly who I was, where I was from, who I trained with, and by extending that trust, you create the connection. Whereas it could have been a very closed off situation where I might have had to earn my way through, and that's one method of doing it. But I found that by their trusting me, it made me want to demonstrate that I was worthy of that trust and that I was cognizant of the trust they were putting in me. And I found that to be the case with a lot of my interactions with Seb, with Sean. They will give me a little bit to be responsible for, and I found that to be encouraging because earlier in my life, I did not trust myself and I wasn't given much trust. And therefore, it creates this feedback loop of I must not be trustworthy. I must not be competent because I don't have a body of evidence of being able to handle this gift, so to speak, very well. So that would be it. It's just a segue. It's just like it's a vignette that's popped into my head regarding the one of the many ways that trust can manifest.
Yeah. I find it interesting because we're talking about trust as a almost like a tangible thing, like a physical thing that you can hand to people and like, oh no, I'm going to take some of that. I'm going to give that to you. But the thing that I was wondering about was, Sean, you were talking about a group that like a trust within a group of, somebody comes in, they have to earn their spot to be there, and then they have to earn their spot continuously to stay there, which absolutely makes sense in terms of some of the backgrounds that we come from. But what I'm really wondering is, you've said this before, if you see somebody else with a Pathfinder pin, you're just like, Raj, you know what that guy's been through. There's almost an implicit level of trust, almost given just by the badge. So I'm wondering if it's possible that you don't have to be present in the trustful actions, if that makes sense. Is it more of a I can understand and empathize with where that person has been and therefore I can trust them kind of deal, or something different? Am I a little off base, Sean? What do you think?
Well, I think so. You're referring, maybe this might refer back to Monday when we were talking about titles and how titles can confer or infer that someone is XYZ. And so, Pathfinder is a title up here in Canada that is kind of a big deal. So, if I see someone who's wearing a Pathfinder torch or a Pathfinder shirt, guaranteed they're A plus in my books, because I understand the process that created that individual. I understand the skill sets that they hold, et cetera, et cetera. I know that the high standards to create that are so adverse that the person in front of me with that Pathfinder torch is good to go. But that's kind of like Eric to some degree, with the levels of black beltdom that he has. I mean, it infers that someone has gone through the crucible, has gone through some standards, has achieved a certain amount of subject matter expertise, that it implies that Eric is trustworthy in respect to his skill set, BJJ. But that doesn't mean that Eric is a trustworthy man, nor does it mean that a Pathfinder is a trustworthy man. They're trustworthy in their capacity to represent the title that we're talking about. If we're talking about jumping behind enemy lines in the pitch black, maybe Eric ain't the right guy for that, or maybe he is. But if we're talking about someone running a class full of black belts, Eric is probably the right guy, and Sean probably isn't. And so the titles that are conferred upon us are based on what I consider to be a limited aspect of the overarching theme of trust. Because what we're talking about is trusting someone's skills, trusting their standards, trusting this, that, a silo of that person's life. We're not talking about all of the other stuff that's wrapped around it. Maybe you're a mass murderer and a Pathfinder. And so these titles and these things that we kind of lay trust on implicitly based on the inferred standards, that's good. But I always look a lot deeper when I see a title. The title is just the handshake, but I'm looking for what's beyond the handshake in the moment, as it were.
I like that. Eric, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, titles give me information for sure. They give me some information, and that's about all they give me. I think if I'm being really present, yeah, a title will give me information, and then it's a moment to moment being present with what's in front of me. I know a lot of black belts that are pretty miserable human beings. I know a lot of black belts that, yeah, that are tyrants that take advantage of their leadership positions and all that stuff. I know people in high leadership positions that I don't consider very good leaders at all. I think that their leadership skills are actually piss poor, and that I've seen. Right, it's just my opinions and interpretations. So yeah, it's moment to moment being with this person, being present to them, and seeing what comes up. I can take my trust or give my trust as I say. I don't think it's something that I just have to hand out as like this as a blanket statement. I think it's moment to moment. Where am I at versus where is this person at? Somebody could be trustworthy on a certain day, and then I could feel that they're off. And you know what? Maybe I'm not going to put this on them today because I don't feel like they have the bandwidth for it. As opposed to just carte blanche, you have my trust forever and always. I mean, that's even the case with my wife. Like I trust my wife in, pretty much implicitly and explicitly. I trust my wife, but there's certain days where I can tell where her bandwidth is at, that I'm not going to give her certain things. And I'll wait for, or maybe I'll have to wait for a time where, all right, now's the time we can have this conversation. I feel like I can trust the energy here enough that this conversation can be productive.
Interesting. Tanya?
I gotta
Sean?
jump
Yeah,
in and
jump
just
in.
say that I blew it at the start of this conversation because I assumed that everyone understands how my brain works, and it works like this. You'll freaking earn my trust, and you'll earn my respect. It doesn't get given away for free. Never, ever have I ever given it away for free. If I trust you, you've earned it. If I respect you, you've earned it. There's no hallway passes on those two things. And trust and respect are not something that is a binary switch. I don't look at a person, they earn it, and I think, oh, mega, they're 100% trust, 100% respect. It's a scale. It's a granular scale, a sliding scale, we'll call it, that starts at 0, and I edge it all the way up to 10 out of 10 if that's the case. And by the way, just as Eric said, that 10 can slip back to 8 depending on the circumstances. And not just the moment of the circumstance, not just whose energy is high or low kind of circumstance. It all comes down to skill sets. I'm going to trust Eric to run an amazing BJJ mat session. I'm not going to trust Eric to fly my plane unless you're a pilot.
Don't trust me to
No,
fly.
okay, so then I don't trust you. So I don't give Eric trust to fly me across the continent. He'll earn that trust by putting on a captain's hat after he's passed the course, done a boatload of flying hours, and then shakes my hand as I'm climbing onto his plane that he knows how to fly really well. That is trust.
It's an interesting concept too, because I really like where this is going, but I do have some comments here. But Tanya, do you have any other thoughts before we move on?
I fear this question may open a can of worms.
Do it.
Do
I
it.
don't see comments, so is it a wormy comment or
It's definitely wormy.
well, let's bring on the worms.
My question is, would that be trust in? I don't know if the phrase works. Would that be trust in the moment per se? Because while the trust may vary, people and context are almost inextricably intertwined, right? So there is also a trust in the context. Me in a photo shoot versus me in a shootout, that changes, and your trust in me in that moment. Those two, I don't know if you can separate it, and that's all I had to say, or ask
that-
rather.
That's where I was going to go with this this next setup here. But I used to think this was a pretty standard way of thinking, was the fact that I had a friend of mine ask me once, what's the difference between like a regular friend and an army friend? And I was like, well, an army friend, I can call at 3:00 in the morning and say, show up here with a shovel. They won't ask any questions. They'll just be like, roger that, and they will show up. But that's not actually trust. It's not even close to what that is. And so it's interesting to hear this, because that's what I was thinking, was that each person has a variable level of trust based on their skill set, based on my experience, based on how they're doing today, how I'm doing today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is more of we were talking about, the moment the other day in terms of time, and that we are all just one continuous moment. And it's an interesting discussion point to go into how trust actually is a fluid concept, consistently, day by day, moment by moment. You got any thoughts on that, Eric?
I mean, that's kind of what I was getting at. I think
Yeah.
in what I shared earlier. Uh, I think trust, honestly, is more of a reflection of the vulnerability that I'm looking to protect, right? And I think like that, like what extends out of that is how much I will or won't trust. Like so, whatever to the level I'm protecting something, I think a lot of that has to do with the level that I give or don't give trust. I think like the amount of vulnerabilities a person's protecting can speak to the level of trust that they will or won't give. And I think that's true for me. And I experience that in my work as true for people that have a hard time trusting, they're protecting a lot.
That's a really, yeah.
If
Sean,
I
what do you think?
may,
Oh, you want to jump in, Tanya? By all means.
sure. I mean, I would label that almost as I call it black belt energy, or even whatever energy Sean has going on, that weird vortex of something emanating from it. It's how vulnerable you may feel in a given moment, and we've seen online and in on the streets, people do feel very vulnerable, and it makes them very distrustful. It makes them very on edge, to put it mildly. And then there are those, and you can see them, the way they move, the way they conduct themselves, the way they talk, even from just like a slap bump. You can see that they know that they can more than likely handle whatever you're about to give them in that moment. And that's, yeah, I would say that's it.
Interesting. Sean?
I think something that Eric stated in on the trust aspect and being vulnerable. So, what we should probably do is subunit this or subcategorize it into psychological, emotional, and physiological trust. Or we could break it down into non operational, operational, however we want to carve it down. But it can't just be a general comment of trust, earn my trust or you don't get my trust. Because operationally speaking, in very small units, very tight units, very elite units, we'll call it, that level of trust has been developed long before you were born. That culture of trust is mandatory based on the circumstances in front of that very small elite unit. And so when you step into it, the expectations are already high. And those expectations are demanded every day. And that's what I made reference to earlier is consistency of effort, consistency of delivery, consistency of reliability is that's what trust is predicated on in a high performing small organization, a circle of trust, if you will. Now, I'm not talking about family. I'm not talking about friends. I'm not talking about anything other than operational trust. At that level, you should have no doubt. There is no room for doubt. And how is doubt removed? On the daily, consistently and reliably performing to the high standard that is expected of you as a group and as an individual to execute against the task at hand and produce a positive outcome every day. Not every week, not every month, not when you want to. It's guaranteed mandatory now. You will perform based on we trust you to be able to perform now. Now, scale that way back from an operational level and out into the general population. Similar trends are still required. For someone to gain my trust, I need some level of consistency. I need to be able to, when I hand them something to do or they hand something for me to do, I need to understand that they understand the process, this game called trust. And if their definition of trust, if they were raised without a definition of trust, and they think that trust is randomized, sporadic, sometimes I do it well, sometimes I don't care how well I do it, that ain't going to develop trust. So to gain someone's trust, maybe we could talk about the fundamental elements of what trust is.
Accountability.
Absolutely.
100% accountability for sure.
I think in hearing Sean speak, what it's making me think of is like trust is an interactive experience or an interactive dynamic. Like if I just, when I trust through expectation, a lot of times it's leaving me open to be let down. But when I take an interactive approach as opposed as like clarifying expectations, right? So if I'm clear in communication with what's expected or what I'd like or what my needs actually are, that sets me up to have the other person clearly understand. Now, from that point, if I'm clear in my communication and what my needs are, boundaries, etc., and then they are crossed or not lived up to, then that's a conversation that we can go from there. But if I just lay out a flat expectation, sort of like an invisible line, and those invisible lines get crossed, that's on me. For my invisible, because I didn't set up any context boundaries or expectation of what is okay with me, what's not okay with me, what works for me and what doesn't. So I think it's really important and it keeps me from being a victim, right? It keeps me from setting myself up to be a victim, to clearly communicate what trust looks like for me. And that could be different with different people, because they're, like you said, they might be coming from a completely different understanding of what trust is. And so if I just go off their prior experience and we don't have any communication in between that, I think it just sets us both up for misunderstandings.
May I interject or ask
Yeah.
a question?
Give her.
See if I can remember. I fully agree. So, how do we communicate these things in, for example, oh, sorry, there's noise outside. Sorry. I might have to choke out the garbage.
Do you
man.
trust that noise?
No, probably.
She does not trust the noise.
stands
We're
for-
watching the processing.
Yeah. My question would be, how do you cultivate that in, let's say, cultures or gym culture where it isn't exactly, communication either isn't accessible or isn't really encouraged? Because I myself have been guilty of it, and I've seen it countless times at this point where people are sparring and they have set an invisible line. They have set an invisible line as to how hard you can roll or how hard you can strike. And once that line gets crossed, all hell breaks loose, because myself included, and that person may not feel comfortable, or just they don't have that gap between feeling that line get crossed and a reaction. So what would you guys do to cultivate that and perhaps demonstrate that within yourselves?
Sean, what do you think?
Well, I was going to defer to Eric, since he's probably far better suited to answer the question.
Well, I think this would be, so I'm going to go out on a on a limb and say this could be held in many different contexts. And so I think first it starts with the leadership, and I think so it's absolutely helpful if the leader provides sits people down and talks about this. And I'll speak about this regularly in my classes, because especially when I'm teaching people just off the street. Like, I don't work with a ton of professional athletes anymore. Professional athletes, it's quite a bit easier to deal with this, but with new people, they don't know what they're doing. They're coming in like baby giraffes. They could barely walk and chew gum at the same time often. So and I used to be really impatient about this because I worked with professional athletes. I'd be like, oh, these people, I would have a lot of judgment about it. And what I had to realize is not everybody walks in as a professional athlete. They walk in as just some scared guy that wants to have some confidence. Okay, so my expectations for this gentleman need to be different. Now, if he doesn't understand what my expectations are or what the expectations are, and I just do the lazy thing and he'll just learn through the gym culture. That's what most instructors do. They do not talk to people. They do not communicate. So I'd say, one, it starts with lazy coaching. Then it's like, okay, hey, take ownership over your training. If I have a 50-year-old woman in the class and she ends up rolling with one of the studs in the class, tell them what you're looking to get out of the roll. Okay, now that's the context of an open class. If we're in competition class, the expectations will be implied and expected, and a lot of that is going to be about shut your mouth, trust the process. So completely different completely different context, right? Where I have a vision. I need to know that you trust my vision for the competition team, and this is where I'm looking to guide us, and this is what I see necessary. Now, am I open to your input? Yes, perhaps not in the middle of the mat or in the middle of a practice where it can be distracting, but after practice, before practice, we can have a conversation. You may be seeing something that I'm not seeing that could add value. So there's different contexts. I think the biggest thing is people in general could do with a lot more personal responsibility. I think trust and expectations and communication all come down to personal responsibility. It is my job to make clear my expectations and let my needs and boundaries be known. If I have an injury, it is my job to tell you that when we step on the mat. If I'm particularly sensitive about something in my personal life, it is my job to let you know that, not just get upset or triggered because you say something that's upsetting to me. It's not the world's job to tiptoe around my invisible lines.
Absolutely. Sean, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to keep going back to this photo. It's embarrassing, but I got to use it as my stage prop. I pulled it out of the photo album. I'm stage propping today. So this circle of trust, that was 6 years into my military career versus in 1983 when I started my military career, I didn't even understand how to spell trust. And so the military taught me to trust certain processes. That's the key word to me, process. At 6 years in, looking at that circle of trust, I knew what I had to do in order to get a seat at that table because I'd been in the game 6 years. I mean, if you're in the game that long, hard charging, you figure a few things out. One of those things is figuring out what it takes to get to where you need to go or where you want to go or where you belong, we'll call it. And so I didn't have to learn the process when I entered into that circle. I'd known it for years at that point. That's way different than basic training. So now I'm going to draw the parallels to what Eric just said. On the comp mat or on the competition mat, we can all safely assume that that's not day oneers. That's people who have been in a process for a while. We'll call it a year or two maybe or longer. And so through that time, they've come to learn a process. Now here's the trick. The process that they learned, is it the right process or the wrong process? Or is it the right process, but it's being done wrong here, or it's being done there, and it needs to get cleaned up, or whatever? If it's someone from another gym who steps in at 2 years into their game, and now they're onto the comp mats, maybe they never learned common courtesy. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to be super polite on the mats when it's competition night. I'm just saying there's common courtesies. There's expectations. There's understandings of how not to be a goof. And so if you never learned these kind of things because you're from another location, then the process needs to get tweaked, not the individual. And so they probably learned a incorrect process for the mats that they've stepped onto. And that's just like the military. In basic training, you don't know the process. You get taught the process. And then when you understand the process, you start unfolding that process in front of you and you start smashing. You start knocking it out of the park using the process that you're taught. And however far you go and whatever outcomes you achieve, that's a result of you applying a process that you're taught on day one. And so all of those giraffes that are stepping onto the mats, chewing their gum and tripping over their giraffe feet, that's because they don't know the process yet. It's Eric's job to teach them the process. What they do with the process is what then creates trust within the team that they're stepping into.
Yeah, absolutely. Tanya, you got any points on that?
What people also have to ask, I would imagine, because I find that so many of miscommunications are either people not voicing their expectation or people not even asking. And as Sean would say, orient to the ground. I find that not a lot of people will do that. When they go to a gym, I'm going to use the gym example quite a bit. When someone off the street walks into a jiu-jitsu gym, they don't look at the signs. They don't look at things where it says no shoes on the mat over and over and over. and they'll just walk right onto the mat with their street shoes. And I find that there is a need to be, I guess, situationally aware, not only extrinsically, but externally, but also to have a great deal of interoception. And when you're not sure about something, generally it's okay to ask, especially in the beginning. If I'm in somehow ended up in JTF2 and I'm like, which end of the gun is the noisy end? Then, that's probably, that should have been asked quite a while back. So I guess that would be my thought on it.
Interesting. As I've been listening to you guys, I've been really. I use this term quite a bit on the mats. They say, as in jujitsu, so in life. But I think that that's such a great comment you made earlier there, Eric, was the gym culture allows itself to be built. But, or sorry, there's times where people can just, you gain that culture through osmosis and you just kind of pick it up. But that gym culture is still built, just like in the military, through years of operations and history and upholding of a standard. And to what you were saying, Sean, was the fact that there's certain understandings, right? There's unwritten rules that are just straight rules that if you don't abide by, you're going to get told, and you're going to get told right away. But it also goes to your point, Tanya, as well, in that if somebody new walks in on day one and they walk onto the mats with their shoes on, that's up to the instructor or someone to uphold the gym culture, whoever the person is, white belt to sergeant major, whatever, right? To come over and correct that person. Hey, no shoes on the mats. Step back to the front door. No questions asked. That's part of the trust of that circle. And I think that in life, if you uphold your culture, if you uphold what you believe in, then your circle develops itself as the gym culture develops itself, as the military culture was developed in and of itself. I do have some comments here, but any other thoughts on anything I got there?
I think I'd just
Yeah.
like to add.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Sean.
go for it, Eric.
I was just going to say that standards and culture are two different things. No shoes on the mat. That's the standard. Young white belt stepping up to someone on their first night and saying, "Hey, you goof, get off the mat. Shoes aren't allowed on the mats." That's the culture. Standards, culture. If a good leader within that space has set the appropriate culture, the day 3 white belt who's about to jack up the day 0, not even a white belt, will do this. Hey, yeah, shoes aren't allowed on the mats. I know I did the same thing myself. I didn't see the signs, but it's all good. Just head on over there, take your shoes off, and just look for someone who's got some black around their waist. They'll figure things out for you. And so there's lots of different ways that a culture can be driven, but the standards, reinforced standards, are the fundamentals of what will set a culture.
Absolutely.
Sorry if I'm going to add.
Go for it,
sorry,
Tanya. And
Eric.
then I'll come back to you, Eric. Don't worry.
Yeah, I completely agree, Sean. I'm wondering, in regards to culture, I suppose I would like to clarify from my point is, whenever you go to a new country, a new place, somewhere with a different culture, I feel that there is a fair bit of onus on the individual to look around and check, the way Sean would conduct himself in a foreign country mission or otherwise can be very different than, sorry, Eric, the average American tourist. And it's the awareness of the habitus, or at least an inquisitive, intentional curiosity about, is what I'm doing cool? Is it okay? Am I being a goof? And a healthy sense of hypervigilance and just checking yourself and checking your environment. So that was just my own self-imposed clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, thoughts?
I forgot what I was going to say originally, but yeah, I mean, go to the Middle East and you may feel a strong inclination to abide by the cultural norms there while you're there, and it'll probably do you a lot of favor. And I think that's true for a lot of different parts of the world. And I think that's true for gyms too. I think it's like and then there's room for communication, dialogue, and to feel the room, or the how much space do I have to be me, in contrast to what the expectations or norms are. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just basic self-awareness, and I think it's important not to expect that everybody has basic self-awareness. And so if I'm in a leadership position of some sort, let me just assume that they don't, and communicate clearly what's expected. Right? Take the responsibility to be clear. One of my mentors just says, "Inspect what you expect." Right? It's like, it saves me a lot of time if I inspect what I expect. I'm saving all of us a bunch of time to be pissed off later on. If I just make an expectation and that's it, man, almost always setting myself up for some type of disappointment. And
Sean,
oh,
anything
and
to add?
actually, that's
Sorry.
what I wanted to say. That leads me to what I was thinking about. I think too, when we're talking about trust, and this, I have a lot of wiggle room with trust for some reason, and not everybody has to feel like this. Just me personally, because what I've learned is that when there's breakdowns in trust, it has the potential to lead to an actual greater understanding and a greater trust. So like, having breakdowns doesn't mean that, like, you're banished from the kingdom. And I know some people, that's how they work things. And I would say, I'd be curious to see what they're protecting when that's their standard operating procedure. But I know, like, being married, the strength of my marriage is because of the breakdowns that we have. It's because of, there's times where, yeah, trust has definitely been broken in certain contexts, and we've gotten to because we're aligned in where we're going, right? Okay, so we are aligned that we do want to continue to grow together, and we are aligned that this didn't work, what we just did here. And so based off this feedback, what do we want to do moving forward? What would be a great way to handle this moving forward? Now we are clearer in our communication, and trust gets built. And is that always going to be the way? No. And I guess, I think what I'm coming to as I talk this out is, are we aligned in where we're going? If we're aligned, then I think I have some wiggle room for trust to be broken, because that just, we can strengthen our communication and strengthen some of the things that led to the breakdown, so that we're a stronger unit moving towards the goal that we have, if you will. If we're not aligned, and I see that we're not aligned, I may not have space for you in my life. And it's not like a right, wrong, good or bad thing. It's just about, I have so much time, and this is what I'm moving towards. And if people aren't aligned with that mission, then yeah, it's just, I just don't, I don't have space for that.
I have a question. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go for it,
I'm
Tanya. I
interrupting
saw
like
you.
crazy.
I saw you piping up to the mic. You're good. Carry on.
So Eric, I love what you just said. I really resonate with it. And I'm very curious, if we're going to go back to, I don't know, an operational context. Sean, especially when you were playing some fairly high stakes games, even when it came to racing. So what happens when that trust is damaged? Because Eric, what he had said, for me, and I was taught by my therapist, relationships are about repair. Like he was saying, a great deal more trust can be built in many ways when you come together and you work it out and you strengthen that bond. So I'm going to just keep it fairly narrow, but when you were in special operations, in some weird parallel universe where someone actually made a mistake, you can choose the gravity of the mistake. Is there repair? Is there wiggle room to repair? And if so, how do you do it?
That's a good question. So I think, first of all, I should establish that trust is built. It's not handed out like Halloween candy. And so depending on we'll call it an operational tempo, or depending on the severity of the requirement for the trust, I'll just use Eric as an example, perhaps. So within that relationship, trust is only as strong as the adversity that it goes through. And so one of the great things about working towards the tip of the spear, or tier one, is you have to face so much adversity that there's a filtering process, that you better understand not just the men around you, but you get to understand yourself. And so, first things first, before you can trust anyone else, you've got to start freaking trusting yourself. Yeah, how do you define trust if you can't even spell it? So, you got to get to work on understanding who you are and what you're reliable and what you're consistent and what you're capable of delivering on the regular, on the daily. And then, once you understand yourself through a process, you're still interoperating with all the processes around you, but you're getting a sense of yourself and what you can deliver and what you can't deliver. And so if there's something that you can't deliver, but you're asked to deliver it, we'll call it in a relationship as an example. The other part that we've discussed is it's a two-way communication highway. You can't just assume everything. You got to talk. You got to figure things out two-way. And if in that moment you're not thinking about the trust levels, then you're missing the boat. It should be something that is always front and center on your mind on what is going on here. What are my expectations here? What are their expectations here? Let's freaking talk this out. And so as you move further and further up, the requirement to do that gets less and less. Because you've been in the game so long that the trust has been engaged so long that the communication is kind of like you read someone's mind. They read yours. There's no talking happening. Things just do themselves. And that's the way it is. So trust, I believe, again, takes a lot of time to develop a high level of trust, but it won't happen unless the parties involved in that circle of trust have worked through adversity. Because that's where your trust gets tested. That's where it gets modified. That's where it either gets rebuilt or reshaped or re-strengthened or changed into something that works for the new moment in front of you. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sean, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What I'm hearing is that all of that is based off you guys are aligned to a common goal, right? So if you guys aren't aligned, none of this happens in the first place.
An alignment is as simple as understanding the basic why of the moment, or it can be all the way up through a very high level nuanced aspect of the milliseconds of all of the data bandwidth that you're expected to deliver in the moment. The trust is an overarching theme of we got this. We all know why we're here. We're here for this reason, ... That's the overarching circle of trust. But in the now, as it's all unfolding and things going chaotically sideways and all of that good stuff, well, my trust in the people around me at that time is based on they've been in the chaos. I can trust them through the adversity of the moment because they're proven in the process. And so someone who steps onto the mat as a white belt, they're not proven. They don't understand the process. They haven't been in the adversity. They can't even spell it. I can't trust them to be robustly leaders on the mats by day 3. It's impossible. No matter what kind of CEO they are or general or whatever, it doesn't matter. They could be the mega special operations guy who was leader McLeader, and they step onto the mats on day 1. They ain't a leader. They're entering into a new process with a growth mindset, hopefully, that in time, through a two-way communication of reliable, consistent, ethical, righteousness, not being a goof, through all of that process over time, I'll start to assign trust to them. Go mop the floor or whatever it is. So through a process, they will earn my trust. And I think that's the case with relationships. It's the case with teams. It's the case with ourselves.
We're running short on time here, so I'm going to get some quick final thoughts. I know Tanya has to run, and I actually have to run it pretty quickly too, but I just want to crystallize something in my mind too, is the fact that kind of what we're talking about in terms of these relationships, in long-term relationships especially, is that there are constant, small lapses of trust, right? Little things. oh, you didn't put the dishes away in a relationship. Oh, you failed to polish your boots. Go do it again, right? And it's in those micro communications. It's in those small um, bandwidth shifts to get people into that alignment allows for those long-term building blocks to be built into trust. And I think it's the comment you made where you said that trust is actually a series of breaking or something similar to that, or breaking of trust. That makes sense because that's how you engage in relationships in any way, right? I'm going to talk to you. You're going to talk to me. We're going to figure each other out. We're going to see if we're aligned in any way. And then as that trip goes, that alignment gets narrower and narrower and narrower because we've constantly hit those guidelines or the guardrails on either side on your arcs of bandwidth, for lack of a better term. So I think it's a fantastic conversation. I know, Tanya, you got to run. Let's do some final thoughts, and then we'll shut her down real quick. Tanya, what do you think?
Absolutely. My final thought is just simply an addendum to your point, where I had a recent conversation where the other individual was saying, let's not argue about this because it's pointless. And then I was about to agree and acquiesce, and then I realized, no, this is the time to, maybe not a full drag out fight, but this is the time to practice and get aligned and practice how to repair. Because Sean was saying, you go through all of the things to get up to the special forces. You need to do it when it's safe to, not when it is an operation, lives are on the line. This is not the time to be like, I guess I'll figure out how to shoot this thing now. This is how we work together as a team. I'm going to figure that out in this moment. It should be a series of processes that lead up. And since the apocalypse is outside my window, that's just my last point.
Right. Thanks. Eric, some final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just for me, and just my general guiding philosophy is that my trust is my responsibility, and it's actually not the other person's responsibility. It's me, and I think that it just saves me from a lot of victimhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, final thoughts?
On Tanya's point, where she said it was pointless, no pun intended, I think that it comes down to pointless for who? For the person who said it out loud? Maybe it's pointless to them, but then that's a real indicator of what's going on in the moment. Maybe someone doesn't value someone's time, maybe someone doesn't, whatever. Pointless to them, not pointless to you. And so that is, in my determination, it's somewhat of a breach of trust if someone can't give you their trust. Because again, it's a two-way highway. If trust is a bridge and you're the only one who's crossing the bridge every single time on a one-way traffic bridge, what kind of trust is that? So that's all I will say on the pointless thing. And then to Eric's point, I do believe that trust is something that takes time, that we are responsible to ourselves to build for others. I don't expect everyone to tractor beam me into their life and draw the trust out of me. My freaking job is to act independently and demonstrate to them that I'm trustworthy over a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a big topic, and I'm glad that we were able to actually kind of really dive into not only the circle of trust, but what trust is, how it's built, all these things. There's some absolutely fantastic points throughout this whole thing. I want to thank Eric so much for joining us. Tanya, really enjoyed the conversation as always. And Sean, it's always good talking to you. I think that everybody can learn from this particular topic, and I think we all need to build upon our own understanding of what trust is within ourselves so that we can grow into the person that we're meant to be. And you can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.